Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Corporate Pakistan Group, I welcome you all, especially my participants and friends on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I also welcome my very learned panelist, Mr. Ahsan Zafar from Engro, and Mr. Fiaz Chaudhry, who is currently working in LUMS. Previously, he was managing director of NGDC. A little bit of background on CPG. CPG was founded by Mr. Ahsan. Most of you people would know about that. What the purpose of the CPG was to bring together the brains of the country for the betterment of course, the economy and the other socio-economic affairs. CPG, I mean, among the other activities, CPG represents top intelligentsia, including the corporate, social, political, government, and other important stakeholders. Since this COVID-related lockdown, this is going to be our 29th webinar, and I must say that it's been a very good feedback that we have received on the various topics that we have addressed, which included the economy, the Karachi status, including the Karachi electricity power problems, legal, submarine marines, and a lot of topics. And this particular seminar, this is going to be our fourth on power sector. Previously, we hosted the former secretary, Mr. Daga, and then we had Khalid Mansoor Saab on it, and Asad Ali Shah, Monis from Karachi Electric. So we try to cover most of the topic in angles to understand the problem of power sector, as well as collected the suggestion to move forward and improve the power sector. This topic, power sector, is and has been a very interesting topic. I mean, it has become actually, can take the liberty of saying it, the fashion statement as well. And there are a lot of myths and realities about this sector. People think that it's a simple sector. It's a very complicated sector, actually. And if you look at it, especially with reference to Pakistan, it's a backbone of the economy. Really depend the economy, which include our finance side of the government, really dependent or affected by this power sector for the right and wrong reason. And the impact of this the power sector for its benefits or the negative side not only affect the businesses of the country, but also the social side of that. When you have to suffer long hours of load shedding. Interestingly, if you look at power sector of Pakistan, we have lived, I mean, very uniquely, all type of situations, from government-owned to then privately owned, operated power generation, from heavily dependent on hydro to then thermal generation, from extreme shortage to now currently we are now surplus. So we have experienced all. So I don't think so there is much left to experience, but today we will try to actually learn from the other angles in terms of planning and the other suggestions that how we can actually resolve the current crisis. I mean, my learned panelist would give you the technical and the planning backgrounds, plus the future outlook and the action that we need to take to fix the power sector. And just to add, I mean, the uniqueness and the complication in the power sector cannot be looked at simply the power generation. It's a huge value chain, starting from the actually fuel supply, the import dependence on the fuel, the type of fuels, the generating company, the level of their efficiencies, and their locations, their ability to generate. And then on same, if it goes forward, is the transmission. Luckily, we had relatively better transmission system, and then it leads to the distribution system. Having worked on the both side of the table, I mean, on the private sector as well as the government side, distribution side is, in my view, the area we need to extremely focus for the financial side and the better use of the generation that we have. And then, I mean, uniquely, we normally the bus stops here, but if you go into the detail, actually, the consumer mix also has an effect on the viability of this power sector, because we have a system of subsidy and cross subsidy. You would know that the government provides subsidy to the consumer, and within that consumer set, the commercial side and industrial side also subsidize the domestic sector. So when we have less power, actually, and the first sector which is affected from the power consumption is the industrial and commercial sector, meaning thereby their ability to subsidize or help the domestic side gotten lesser. But nevertheless, we will look into, and we would further learn from our learned colleagues that how would they look at it, and in their view, what are the steps that we need to take. You would have seen the introduction of our colleagues. First of all, I would going to request Mr. Zafar. Mr. Zafar is looking after the energy side of Engro. He's a very good professional, has in-depth knowledge of the energy or power sector, because he's not only looking at the generation side, but we're also looking into the mining side of which is one of the resources and one of the focus that government of Pakistan has. I would not take more time from myself, because in the last 3 webinars I've spoken a lot. I'll contribute, but I would learn and request my learned colleagues to give us the presentation or their talk, just to fix the housekeeping and to clear the expectation of our viewers. Generally, the presentation or talk from each gentleman would be 15 to 20 minutes, and then we will have question answers, and then we will conclude this session with recommendations. So first of all, I request Mr. Zafar to come on board and let us have your views on the power sector.
Thank you, Dr. Fiaz, Aftab, and all the viewers. Assalamu alaikum. Firstly, thanks CPG for having me as a panelist for this very important discussion on the energy sector of Pakistan. And I think we all know that there is absolutely no doubt in our mind that energy sector for any country is the most integral and the most critical, I would say, sector for the development of any nation. And I would say that's why people call it either the backbone or the driving engine for the economy of any country. But if Pakistan, if you take the case of Pakistan is no different. Definitely the economy is dependent on how the power sector or the energy sector is performing. But we also need to consider certain uniqueness of Pakistan. For example, our country is a very heavy population country. It's a bulging population with youth, and we need to channelize the energies of this youth in the right direction. And therefore, employment is required, and for their employment, industry is required. And definitely, industry is not coming along because of the high cost of power. So, one issue is population issue, and you need to have solution to this, and for that you need to resolve the power sector issue. Similarly, for poverty alleviation also, there are 2 aspects. One is, the agri sector side, and the other is the industrial sector side. Agri sector only helps the people for their survival, but industrialization actually pulls them out of that, threshold. And therefore, it's very important. So firstly, one problem is your population problem. The second thing, if you consider another angle for our country, which is the balance of payments, exports. For exports also, you need industry, and once again, the problem leads to the power sector. Uh, you pick up any other issue. The most important talked about issue these days is circular debt. And we all know that almost 60% of the circular debt comes from inefficiencies of our distribution companies, our discos. So whatever the issues are, quite a lot of issues, whether they are systematic issues or they are legacy issues from the last 2 decades. All of these have summed up, and we are where we are at this point in time. And the power sector issues have ballooned to an extent where it is not sustainable anymore. We cannot continue like this. So therefore, some kind of solution needs to come in this sector. So what happened is that because of all of this, we have seen that there is resolve from government side. There is very sincere effort going on both from the government side and from the IPP side, where for the first time we have seen discussions taking place, positive deliberations like this taking place, and people are moving in the right direction. So this is something which is very good, and I think in today's discussion we are going to talk about it. Engro is an organization which has very deep domain knowledge of energy sector, and therefore what we did was we embarked on a study around 7 months ago. We consulted a subject specialist, Dr. Fiaz, who's sitting here, was part of those deliberations. We consulted experts from Pakistan, from outside the country, economists from within the country, government officials, and all other stakeholders. And through a consultative process, we conducted a study. And what I thought was that instead of just, giving you some information, I should show you certain numbers and illustrations. Because once you see those numbers and illustrations and you see the slides, then you would be able to capture those numbers very easily, and you'll absorb those. So without much ado, I would request to move on to this presentation. Kashif, if you can put the next slide, please. The previous one. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to discuss how we can fix the Pakistan's power sector. If you look at the heading of this page and understand this slide, there are 5 imminent challenges in Pakistan's power sector: circular debt, excess capacity, low demand, high cost, and foreign exchange drain. What we have done is, if you see on the y-axis, we have plotted complete power value chain, starting from fuel, generation, transmission, distribution, all the way to demand. So the entire value chain is on your y-axis, and in the red box, what we will do now, we will force rank in terms of priority and sequence, and we plot all these 5 issues that you see in the heading across every segment, so that you can figure out what are the issues across various segments of the value chain and how they are prioritized, so that you can give focus on these. Please, next. So the most important part of the issue in the power sector is related to the distribution or discourse, and that is circular debt. Circular debt, there are 4 root causes of circular debt, which I'm going to explain in the next slides. But the foremost reason of the circular debt is the disco inefficiency. And you can see the circular debt is 42% of the annual FBR tax revenue. So this is number 1. This top our list. Next. The second issue is in the segment of generation, where we are facing excess capacity issue. We have kept created this excess capacity, we have taken a very bullish view on demand, and we have taken a very conservative view on the supply side. And even if we take 4.5% of GDP growth, it seems that we will have 3,500 megawatt of surplus by the end of 2025. Next. The third issue is the low demand. And we all know that the electricity prices are among the highest in the region for Pakistan. And this is because, our GDP is growing much faster than our power sector. Instead of power sector leading the GDP by 1.5 times or 1.2 times, it's actually lagging behind. We will discuss about this in the later slides. Next. Fourth is the high cost, which we will discuss. Next. Foreign exchange drain. 6 billion was spent on imported fuels in the year 2019. Next, please. And next. So looking at this slide, you see on one slide all the issues on one canvas, like you see in the control room of any petrochemical or power complex. All the issues are presented on one slide, and they are presented against every segment of the value chain. The gray ones, the other challenges, are of slightly less critical compared to the ones that are given in the red. Move to the next slide, please. Yeah, you can press the animation. Next. Next. Yeah, complete the animation. Yes, stop. Yeah, that's it. So if you look at this slide, it shows that the circular debt grows because of 4 root causes, and the most critical of which is DISCO inefficiency. If you just focus on the left part of this slide, the left part of this slide gives you a complete, linkages of various entities for circular debt, how they are linked and how the payment is made. And I don't want to go into the left side of this slide. Just look onto the right side. You see that due to inefficiencies of the DISCOs, it has contributed 171 billion in just 1 year. And the time lag in tariff has contributed 119, the failure of government to disburse subsidy 82, and expensive servicing cost of debt has contributed 93. So in total, in 1 year, 465 billion rupees is the incremental addition in the circular debt. And if you see, by the end of 2018, it was 1.1 trillion, and by 2019, it became 1.6 trillion. And 60% of this circular debt was coming from DISCOs by the end of 2018. Please move to the next slide. Yeah. DISCOs lose substantially more power than their tariffs allow, which leads to losses for the government. So if you just take this example is made for 100 units, the units provided to any distribution company. And the tariff allows for losses up to 6%. But what happens is that instead of 16% technical losses, they lost additional 12%, which is shown in the red, and the total losses on an average are 28%. Please move to the next slide. And here it is shown that if DISCO's operations are not improved, the inefficiencies will add up further of rupees 1.5 trillion to circular debt by 2025, which could add up and increase to a total circular debt of 4.6 trillion by 2025. So just look at the second part, the second block, which says DISCO inefficiencies. It adds up to 1.4 trillion if the assumptions which are given in the rectangular gray block, if those assumptions are taken, then the circular debt will keep moving. The only thing we have shown as proof is the time lag in tariff adjustment, which we believe can be fixed because of the positive attitude shown by the regulator. Please move to the next slide. Here you see these are the 7 discos which are shown. There are 9 discos. Out of the 9 discos, 4 discos which are shown on the top, KAPCO, PESCO, SEPCO, and HESCO, they account for 87% of payment defaults in the power sector due to the poor law and order situation in these services. So if you look at KAPCO contribute 40% contribution to the total default, PESCO 19%, and so on. So these are the 4 top discos and their contribution. And these, you can just look at the bottom row, you would also see that the running defaulters are around, they are contributing 400 billion rupees, and they are to the tune of around 6 billion running defaulters. Then there are permanent defaulters of around 100 billion rupees. This permanent defaults should be, I think, declared as a bad debt, and these running defaulters, this issue can be fixed through law and order, methods. So this is the situation, and here you will see that one should be focusing on the worst performing disco actually. Please move to the next slide. Provinces control law and order is a critical requirement for turnaround. And you can see that law and order, whether it's timely collections, or we talk about the management of labor, or we talk about the legal action against defaulters or theft or anything, it involves law and order, which is usually under the control of jurisdictions. Investment in infrastructure, which is putting meters on feeders, etc., technical and organizational capabilities, and regulatory support. So what we are saying here is that if one can come up with a public-private partnership kind of a model where provinces take certain ownership and the management is given to organizations which have the capacity and capability to run these organizations in a better form, then this issue of discos can be looked into and can be fixed. Please move on. Next. And the advantages by improving discos, the provinces stand to gain from increased economic activity and greater political capital. So you can see that there will be boost provincial economy, there will be enhanced political capital, and improved electrical access once this is done. Next, please. So if I sum up on the this circular debt topic, and mainly the inefficiencies of the discos, the most critical step to improve circular debt is to improve disco operations, which can be done by involving provinces in their ownership and management. Inefficiencies of the discos we have seen. The worst performing discos should be prioritized for reform on urgent basis, in fact, on war footing basis, and we should consider disco ownership and management by provinces, something like public-private partnership. Time lag in tariff adjustment, we believe that this can be streamlined. Failure of government disburse subsidies, we should eliminate and fully fund customers' price subsidies, and we should services these expensive debts, through something which is much more economical. Let's please move to the next topic. Now I'm moving to the next part of the challenges that I've shown you, the first 5 challenges. This is the second item, which talks about the access capacity. And here, as I've explained earlier, we have considered various cases: 4.5% GDP, 5.5, 7.5. But I will only pick up one example, which is 4.5% GDP. And we all know, because of the pandemic situation, the future numbers are not even close to this 4.5 GDP. But even if take this bullish approach, even with this kind of economic growth in the country, inshallah, and we'll see that happen, we will end up with 3,500 megawatt of surplus power by the end of 2025. And if this GDP, let's say, drops further, then it will be 2026 or 2027 or something like that. So what we are saying here is, we are saying that there are certain actions that we need to consider. What we need to consider here is that we should not progress future plan, projects. We should make sure that the projects which are in the early part of their development, those projects should be stopped. That's number one. The second thing is that we need to have an independent planner. The planning should not be done. And I think Dr. Fiaz, this is a subject which is very close to his heart. He will definitely talk about this. The planning should not be done by all independent entities. It should be done by a central independent party who should do all the planning. And if the planning is done correctly in conjunction with the planning of the industrial sector, then you will see a completely different situation. We will not be facing the deficit, 10 years of deficit, 10 years of surplus, and then this cycle should not come again. So in my opinion, independent planning is extremely important, and we should put a stop to the new projects which are coming up. And secondly, we should go for the sector reform, which means competitive market framework structure that should be introduced, and that should be started with the bilateral arrangements between the country, between the companies. And if that would happen, only then the situation would improve.
Ahsan, may I request to cover it in 5 minutes, because we are just crossing the time, please?
Yeah, I will wrap it up in 5 minutes. Please move to the next. This is the third topic, which is the low demand. And I think if you ask me what are the two big issues, first I said disco inefficiencies, and I would say that the core issue is the low demand. And this is the reason why we see such high cost, and why we say that the industrialization is not taking place. So this is the cost of electricity of price. These are the prices in Pakistan compared to other countries in the region. You can see that the on the industrial sector, we are 26% higher than the average number. On the residential side, we are 28% higher. Please move to the next slide. And if you notice this illustration and just look at x-axis from 2007 to 2012, or approximately 2012. In these years, you see the terawatts are not changing. From 77 to 79, the terawatts are in the same region. So therefore, the power sector has not seen growth. And the cumulated average growth rate in the power sector was 4%. And as against this, if you see the bottom line, which is the GDP CAGR, the GDP CAGR is showing you a growth rate of 5.3. So instead of your power sector leading the GDP, it's actually lagging behind. Even if you consider previous years in our country, our power sector growth has always been 1.2 times or 1.3 times the GDP growth. But here it has been 0.75. That has been the reason for low demand, and shows that the demand has been low. Please move to the next slide. Now, let's focus on the left side of this slide, and you will see that in high growth developing economies like Vietnam, more than 50% of power demand can come from industry. But in our country, in Pakistan, it's the other way around. Domestic sector is showing consumption, then it's the industrial, and then it's others. So actually, it's completely different from what it should have been. And in addition to that, to make the situation even worse, we have around 5,000 of megawatt taken by the captive power suppliers. So most of the industries, more than 50% of the industry is using their own captive power, and the agony is that 75% of them is less efficient than the grid. But that has taken, and because of that, the demand is not coming on the grid. Please move on. Next. This slide, there are two more important slides which are left. This is a very important slide, and if you see on the right side of the slide, the red horizontal bar, you will see that the capacity payment of 4.6 that you see is because your multiplier of power sector is only 0.75. Had your demand increased and your multiplier improved from 0.75 to 1.20, we would have seen 25% reduction in the capacity payment. So that you see this CP very high because the demand has not increased to an extent which we have seen in the earlier years. So the demand has remained low, and that's why your CP seems to be higher. Otherwise, it would have been 25% lower.
Ahsan, have 2 minutes, please.
Yes, I'm just wrapping up. Just move to the next slide. So can you move to the next slide? I think we have covered. I just want to touch on one slide. Yeah, this is my last slide, and this is, I think, extremely important slide. If you look on the left side of the slide, which gives you weighted average cost breakdown in US cents, you will notice that in 2018, the EPP was 5.6. And in 2025, it came down to 2.6. So actually, in US cents, what you are seeing is that there is a 21% drop in the tariff. The tariff has actually dropped by 21% from 2018 to 2025. It will drop like that. And why it is happening? It is happening because the EPP, we have gone in the right direction. Everything has not been going, in a completely, I would say, in the wrong direction. Something has been done right. So the policies for fuel have actually paid dividend. We have gone from expensive fuels to less expensive fuels, and here you can see EPP improving. However, the CPP that is shown from 3.2 to 4.3, this was planned that way, but the demand didn't came through. Now you look, please look on the right-hand side. If you look at the right-hand side of this slide, in Pakistan PKR terms, the tariff is increasing by 5.1 rupees. And this is happening only because the outlay is dollar denominated and we have no control on rupee devaluation. And that's why you see the CPP going from 3.5 to 8.3. So this is an astonishing slide which tells you that in cents terms, we will be improving. However, in the PKR terms, because of the dollar denomination and outlay, the situation is what it seems like. Please move to the conclusion slide. Yeah. So in the nutshell, what the summary of what I've explained to you is that I think we should move on war footing basis. Please move to the next slide. I would like to conclude. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, because so these are the three conclusions, the big critical takeaways. I think enact DISCO reforms on a war footing to avoid potentially catastrophic impact on the economy. We are already late on this and we must not waste time on it. The second point is that we must reduce impact of rupee devaluation on power cost by renegotiating borrowing terms, whether it's tenure, whether it's a spread, and by promoting indigenous fuels and renewables. We must promote indigenous fuels. We have imported fuel plants and we should do blending on those plants. And for all future projects, we must consider indigenization. And the last point is that we must build on the momentum from CPEC phase 1 by working in partnership with IPP investors to catalyze Pakistan industrial growth and power demand. Whether we talk about the industrial parks or whatever, we must work in full harmony with these IPP investors. These are the people who will, inshallah, work in the CPEC phase 2 also and make sure that the CPEC phase 2 is also successful. Thank you, Aftab.
Thank you very much. It's a very informative and very detailed analysis that you had in. A couple of points that I think your emphasis is that distribution side needs to be improved. because largely the bleeding is coming from the distribution side. And
Yes.
secondly, what I noticed is that the breakdown of it, one of the major component is the devaluation. And one may say that for the generating company, it's an uncontrollable factor, and this factor is controlled by the government. So everything, if the multiplier is changing, the ultimate rupee cost is going to change. And from here, not taking more time, Dr. Choy Sab, your ball is in your court. Just request to be precise, and if some points are already addressed by our friend Ahsan, then we can quickly move because we have slightly stretched already. So please, let's move fast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to contribute and share my thoughts or whatever analysis LUMS Energy Institute has done. I'll share my screen in a minute, but I really want to commend Ahsan Zafar Saab that he has presented things very well, and analysis is pretty decent and very comprehensive. And so I'll, being, have a little title of a professor, so my talk would be little educational, informative, and then some advice that I would like to give, being in the industry for the last 35 years plus. So let's see how quickly I can, convey what I wanted to convey in today's talk. So let me share screen and share. Okay.
I think our friend Kashif from our background, he would share with that.
Yeah. Let me. So, was I able to?
Gigi, we can see this presentation.
You can see the presentation?
Yeah.
Gigi.
Okay, good. So, here, I'll not repeat in detail, but the challenges were mentioned. Unless and until we do this holistically, as Ahsan Zafar Saab has said, in totality, the integrated system plan are independently done. So that would be my sub bullet. But we need to make sure that the energy that we need is available, and it is available at a very least cost. And we need to prepare policies where the results is the result is that we have relatively cheaper energy available. So we need to look at, are we using our indigenous gas resources efficiently? Have we not neglected indigenous resources of renewable alternative or hydro or third, or even gas exploration? Because now we have been facing this difficulty for the last 10 years, but we need to look ahead and then see if we are on the right track. So are we too dependent upon the imported fuel? Have we compromised our security of this, economic and security of this country because we are so much dependent upon the imported fuel? And how can we reduce our? So these are the basic considerations for any policy or plan that you build. But then, once you develop a plan, the end result would be that product of electricity. So we need to make our planning and regulation aligned so that we can provide an affordable electricity to the consumers of this country. And if we do not do this job, planning, regulation, and even, so to speak, or then later on regulation, although it looks that the circular debt is predominantly is by the disclose, but in that number, so the demand of those discos, let's say HESCO, KP, the PESCO, and as well as KESCO, so three provinces, basically which are contributing to those losses. But we need to look at the affordability. Do we have, why those thefts are there, why those losses are there? So you need to go to the root cause. So why the other discos where relatively people are can afford that electricity, so there is a better collection. So we need to look at in those aspects. Then when it is not affordable, tariff is high, then the quality of service is poor, and you have a dissatisfied consumer, well then, unless you have something in your pocket only that you can share. So first we need to put that money into the consumer's pocket before we, basically expect that they will provide or they will pay their dues for the services that we provide as a country. And these things, all that circle will go in circles if we do not make this integrated system plan. Call it, for the country, NTDC as your country's planner. So, which constitutes IGSEP, and TSEP means Indicative Generation Capacity Expansion Plan and Transmission in totality. You call it NTDC plan or you call it Integrated System Plan, which will provide you what technology, what capacity, location, and commissioning date, as well as the investment size, the total investment that you need to run this sector. So now once you have that plan in place, a regulation in place, and you know what the cost is going to be, what the tariff is going to be, is it affordable or not at the planning level? So you cannot, make it as a reactive planning like we did in the last 20 years. So we created basically this surplus deficit situation because we did not, really quantify our demand properly and our supply arrangement. And even if we have lately, in the last 3-4 years, we have developed a lot of generation, but then the distribution infrastructure, transmission is still decent, but the distribution infrastructure we have not improved. So what will that result? That will result in circular debt and poor quality of service. But all this is, these objectives of availability, affordability, and reliability has no meaning unless you structure this business properly, which is power sector. And you need to build institutional capacities and then improve governance. So these are the challenges we have been facing. We are not prioritizing. We are not pushing the right buttons to get out of this vicious circle. The reason is our conflicting interests. So Ahsan Zafar Saab has rightly said, independent. So we cannot go into this lobby business. This country has faced problems for many years now, but still we are not getting out of that provincial card playing. This is a national subject, and unless we do this independent of any conflict, any lobbyism in the national electricity planning or energy planning. Only then we can get out of this vicious circle that we are, Anyway, so this is a little teaching part. This part we need to, optimum range we need to stage. We cannot make systems so reliable that it is costing us high, but we cannot also reduce our reliability that the outage cost is very high. You need to optimize, when you're planning your transmission or generation facilities. But this process is in place, but we have not really implemented that process. So this dotted that you see under the planning code, demand forecast, generation plan, transmission plan, total investment plan, this part is already in place. And this is part of the grid code since the day one. But we have not followed this approach, and we have been, listening to the lobbyisms or whatever political will we had, or we didn't have any will. So not following those processes, those created challenges for us. And going forward, we need to stop those, the way we have been doing things. Otherwise, we will further deteriorate. So here, two things we decide. One, capacity, and the second, energy. So capacity, you need to look at what my demand profile is. So this peak, you need to reduce, and you need to flatten your curve, so that, because this portion is very, it's a very limited use. So then, as a country, you need to decide: should I supply that demand, and is it a consumptive demand or is it an industrial demand? What type of demand this is? Should I be even supplying this demand or not? And because if there is a huge disparity between the peak demand and the regular baseload demand, all this gray portion is unrecovered cost. So your capacity payment is going to be huge, like we already did. So our capacity is growing to 70% of your total, tariff. Not sustainable. So that is what we need to be considered in our planning. This is the real graph from NTDC. As you can see, our recorded peak of 22,000 and more, it just appears 1% in the whole year. But the average demand that you see is about 12,000 megawatt, which is 7,000 megawatt is your base load, which is maybe 6,000 some industrial, and the rest is commercial and other things. But everything else, this 10 plus 11,000 megawatt is your cooling load. It only appears in summer. So we need to see, what generation type would be needed for how much time. So you need to simulate each and single hour. Again, here we make energy decisions. Looking at this graph, this is my 7,000 as my base. By the way, this 7,000 megawatt, as Ahsan Sab also rightly said, this demand is your base load, is your basically industrial demand, has not changed. 2015, 2020, 6 years, for God's sake, didn't change. So there was few, captive generation has gone, but again, in any efficient, we need to bring those back. So decision making, very, very important at the planning stage. Yes, we will fix this course, but we need to fix planning first. And these are the factors to be considered, keeping those profiles in mind: supply side, your base load generation, load falling capability generation, and peaking. This is your supply side considerations. And on the demand side management, off grid, supply. If there are some sites are very remote, do we really need to connect to the grid, or should we supply them, as a microgrid? Or the net metering, that is also very, very important. That how much we need to net meter, and now wheeling. So all these are supply demand side considerations for the planning, that you will do an integrated system planning. So,
Dr. Saab, you are, mashallah, very passionate. I just want to remind 7 minutes more, please.
sure. So this is the, May 25. So I basically, when I was at NTDC, this is what I said, and it was reported in the newspaper. I was trying to highlight the situation of this capacity trap would appear in 1819 and would become a reality in 1920 and will continue. So this will add to our circular debt issue. So getting out of NTDC and coming to LUMS, but then we did this Pakistan's electricity outlook. We developed a production simulation model, and this is the demand that you already have seen, slide. This is the generation commitment, about 50,000 megawatt, till 25 is kind of committed. And here are the results of, generation simulation hour by hour for the next 6 years. So blue graph shows you the capacity for each month, because here I have plotted these months from June 20 till March 25. Rather, here is the June, the next month, and also the generation energy potential that you have. So we faced 12 years of load shedding with crippling, shortage, and now we are facing the expensive surplus. So we need to take care of this. What to do with it? And here I think slides were shown by Ahsan Zafar Sab also. So we are, about 60 to 70% will be, rather 65 to 70% will be our capacity payment by 2025. So very, very alarming situation. So we need to, basically broaden our load base. Only then we can survive. So this is the, the capacity charges that this is the energy, as pointed out by Ahsan Zafar also, that our energy portion is not, we control that, but we installed more capacity. That's why our capacity payments, due to a couple of reasons, not only the capacity size is more, but the dollar-based indexation give us trouble. So the overall cost of generation is more. So we need to have. So this is the surplus generation capacity that we need created a financial burden of almost 100 billion now each year to us. So not due to the disco, but due to generation surplus issue. And this is the market size. I'll skip this one. 70% is you're committed, so you have to pay them anyway. So your market size has reduced because of your overcommitments. Now, what the way forward is fixing. How to fix? Number one, you need to make institutions autonomous and independent. Do not continue to remote control from the Ministry of Energy or whatever ministry. Ministry is only there to provide policies with the help of highly capable and experienced technocrats. So this is not their job. So ministry should get out of that business of remote controlling. Number two, our structure. We didn't work on our structure. We tried to unbundle it about the 90s, but then we left it to home. For 20 years, nothing has changed in the grid code. Structure is rotten to the core. So we need to fix this structure. So either public-private partnership on the disco. So there are many issues. I'm just pointing out those, how to do it. Yes, we do have implementation plan as well. But because of the time limitation, I can only say here what to do. How to do? Yes, we can have discussions and I can present those things as well. Leadership positions. We cannot afford any compromised leadership. So the people who know the job, only those people should be given leadership. But then regular regular updates of integrated energy plan and integrated system plans. So that some of the things, suggestions Zafar Sahab suggested, I call it financial engineering for debt servicing that so we need to do something. Broader base, whatever, extend, 10 to 15, reduce interest rate. So do some financial engineering. And currently, I think government is doing that effort. But then creation of that independent system operator, I will show you what will it do. But then some of the theft portion could be ICT technology can be used, and those things can be fixed with a little investment. And then involvement of local community, our provinces, our local, to improve recovery, through public-private partnerships. It's the same point that Ahsan Zafar has mentioned. But then the technical losses, if we, 16% or even 18%, they're high. So they should be less than 10 for sure. So whatever we spent billions and billions of dollars on generation, and we didn't spend even pennies on improving our distribution infrastructure. So we need to reduce those losses. So but then indigenous R&D. So we rely on people, World Bank here and there, ADB. Somebody will tell us. Nobody is going to tell us. It's we who have to fix this sector. Yes, you can, maybe take examples, but put your thoughts together. Okay? So do not stay compromised. So, and, so those are the fixes. And then on top of the list, so this is my kind of last slide, increase base load, because we need to use our capacity. Industrialization is a must. That is the only way to make this power sector financially sustainable. So bring back those captive consumers, and to bring in fuel price parity, and then expand and augment T&D network through public-private partnerships, enforce merit order, and bring electrical vehicles so that our utilization increases, and above all, 10 to 12,000 megawatt we spend on cooling load, consumptive load. So importing oil, importing gas, and using it for cooling. So let's look at our housing sector and our commercial buildings. So we need to, we cannot survive or live with this kind of agony unless we retrofit those buildings and make them efficient buildings. So here, just 2 minutes, rather 1 minute. So all those generation facility, transmission facilities, they need to be monitored and controlled by system operator. What function it will do? It should develop IEP integrated system plan. So planning function of NTDC will go here. Procurement function it has to do. So PPIB, so it will, avoid all the, vested interests and, the conflicting interest of provinces, of organizations. So you need to go to this path. And the system operation. So 6 functions that this independent system operator has to do, and regulatory function which NEPRA cannot do. They do not have eyes and ears unless they have an independent mechanism built into the independent system operator, and the settlement function, yes, which is market operation, CPPG, and efficiency part. So I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Excellent. Mashallah, I knew it because I've seen the presentation, and as you remember, my comments was that this topic, and particularly the presentations that you have, can be discussed at length 4 or 5 hours. Is not a problem with that. And most of the slides you have to skip because you were passionately talking about earlier the academic and the parts. A few takeouts from your presentation and your points. I think you rightly mentioned about the planning part. There was a centralized planning, used to be WAPDA, and there was one of the best. And I remember you are one of the team member of the core planning team, and that lasted and saved us for last many years, decades of this outrage of shortage or excess. Sorry. You talked about structure. Yes, it needs to be addressed. And you rightly mentioned about the R&D, because whatever we do is a knee-jerk reaction. At one point, we would have shortage, and then we have all of a sudden we will rush, and then we have an excess supply with that. You mentioned about now the excess generation. Since we are operating currently, and we have to not only, you can say that daily, but on hourly basis monitor the situation. I have few comments on it. The capacity that we have is rightly in terms of considered excess. But having said that, because we have the excess capacity, but certain areas are still under load shedding. So it's not just the excess capacity that is causing a trouble. Excess capacity and consequently the capacity payment is adding the financial trouble. But there are other issues which are actually affecting the availability of the power to the end consumer. I'm not an engineer, but in my definition, the capacity which can be delivered at the doorstep is the capacity. Otherwise, all other capacities are academic. You are just summing it. And if we have a capacity in Lahore, it cannot be provided in Quetta. So for Quetta, it's no capacity. But you are absolutely right that we need to sort of address all these issues. And coming back to a few questions answered, and then we will have the conclusion, because both my colleagues have stretched. So there are certain parts I have to squeeze. Ahsan sir, you mentioned about, and you actually rightly highlighted the distribution side. And I mean, frankly speaking, my viewer can say that we know this is the problem. We have been confronted with that. What are the 3 steps you think in distribution system we should take to correct the situation? Because everybody says that we have a trouble in distribution company, but then what are the steps that we need to take?
Yeah, firstly, we need to involve provincial government in enforcing law and order, so that the at least running defaulters those defaults can be streamlined. That's one thing. The second thing is to bring in, to improve the capacity. We must do the capacity building of these distribution companies by bringing in professionals in the management, either giving the management to some, experienced corporate entity, or bring in professionals who can run these organizations professionally. That's number 2. And then thirdly, bring in some technical hardware, invest in technical hardware in a sense to bring this outdated system at par, with the requirement. So involvement of provincial government, capacity building of these companies, and investment in the hardware.
Great. Just to add what you said, I mean, not going towards the political angle, but when you involve provinces, it can cut the other wrong way to the companies.
No, so my suggestion.
I think what you mean to say is that if we can provide our distribution companies more independence and decision-making power to go and do not only the fundamental supply, the fundamental right of electricity, but also do the commercial decisions. Because I have been to 5 directors to the 5 distribution companies, and I know how they have operated. And in one company, I just said that if you just close that company and just supply, it would be less burden on the balance sheet and that. So yes, I think just to add what you said is that independence should be given. Good professionals are given with all the authority, and you can the accountability can only come if you empower them. So excellent. I think the third part is the technology part, because now the most of the thing, artificial intelligence, remote metering, or other sectors, ERP, they have installed most of the some of the discourse that I know of. Those should synchronize. But the third challenge, having said that, if you do that, there is the inherent structure that we have that should be driven on commercial basis. And we have seen the successful examples when we privatize the banks or PTCL. All of a sudden, service industry was improved. So, Dr. Saab, any point which we missed, because you have worked the system?
Yeah, I think Ahsan Saab, and you summarized this very well. Like these are cooperative societies in many countries have faced similar issues, and so involvement of the local provincial bodies or municipalities for recovery of so those are the entities which can, as a society, can bring. Otherwise, if you do not, no matter what you do at the SD or XCN level, if you are not supported by the political, the administration in the local, so you won't be able to recover. So no matter either you build what type of lines, whatever you build, extra investment. So I think that is a very, very right. The second, I would agree, but depending upon like individuals' capacity building, yes, that helps. But the management companies which will be running the discos currently, they are my colleagues. They have been groomed. I know how they have been groomed in the last 20 years. So there is not really, we didn't build. They're very good doers, but they are not very good managers. So what you do? So first, make them independent, have 10 people, 20, whatever, make a management company, run that organization along with the team members of that particular disco. That will help improve and identify the real bottlenecks of wherever the investment is needed. So it's a mixed model. As Ahsan Saab, I agree with the approach. I just gave you my
Great. I mean, just for a ready, just saying it Urdu because that's the best code that I can do. We have a ready-made example of privatization of the telecom. Once it was given in the private sector, the quality of service improved. I remember when I was on the other side of the table, I always used to have this debate that why an individual has a problem paying WABDA for electricity, which is a necessity, whereas they are willing to pay 200 rupee top-up card for mobile. So what is the problem? Is it the affordability or the economics that are done, or is this the approach that we have? Whereas we love the necessity, but we are not sort of, but we're paying for that. So what I can say is that, wonderful points, but telecommunication has given us a very good.
Just one clarity.
Yes.
Aftab, just one clarity. When I was talking about the provincial ownership or facilitation, I was referring to public-private partnership kind of a model. You have Engro company where both the corporates and the provincial government and like Dr. Saab says, municipality, they all come together and everybody plays on the strengths that they have. So if the corporates are playing or the professionals are playing on their capability and competence, the provincial government and municipality are playing on their strengths also, and they all come together, and then you can resolve this issue.
Right.
That's what.
All right. One question, and then we will close this, having your last words. on this webinar. Dr. Sab, you worked in NTDC and you have seen the planning, but let's suppose that you are given responsibility. What are the one or two steps that we'd like to take to correct the long-term planning of Pakistan? Because currently I cannot share some pivotal information that even now, having the greatest capacity, excess capacity, we've been asked that you might be running on diesel. So that kind of planning that we have, unfortunately. So what are one or two things on the planning side, because that is your forte?
Yeah, so the whole supply chain. In my very first slide, I wrote the word security.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes.
So that is where we need to sit together. What fuel mix do we have? Okay. And either it's imported, we are depleting, gas reserves. So we need to make sure that our security, fuel security is there. So although we have cars, we have buses, but if we do not have fuel, no matter how many buses you buy. So it's the same scenario here. Similarly, to reduce your import bill, you need to develop your indigenous resources. So it's a total integrated end-to-end planning that is needed. And for that, we do have people in the country, but at NTDC, somehow that generation planning exercise has not been done for the last 20 years. So they are very naive, I would say, very young team. So they cannot produce quality results. And plus, they do not have the knowledge base, for end-to-end planning. So they may be very good at one software operation, but what goes into that software and how it is linked with how many people have come and interviewed you, by the way, from planning?
We
No
have
one.
to go ahead. They don't come. We have
You
to
see?
go and see.
So the thing is that proactive approach has to be there. So it's the system needs you. Okay. So you are at the end of your, let's say 21, PP expires. So it should be me who should be approaching you. What type of investment are you making? Will you be available so that I don't have to spend extra money in securing more capacity? You see? So, and even HUBCO, or you for that material, every other generator. So
Very,
if
very
your
good.
existing vehicle is pretty operational, pretty decent, why would I buy a new car? Unless it makes economic and financial sense. It is not my personal desire. So it is basically we are making decisions for the people of Pakistan. So it is no ego should be there. You see. Anyway, so planning would be the very first thing that I will start with.
Yeah. All right, just one liner question answer I would request from both my friend. What is the correct approach? Increase revenue, like one of the friends said, that increase sale, increase if you have generation, then sell it, and then manage the cost, or reduce the cost so that we can control our generation deficits. So which way we need to move? I mean, this is more of an economical question, if I'm able to.
Chicken and egg.
Because I have it written to ask this. GSN, whether we have to increase the sale to control the cost, or we have to reduce the cost first and then control our balance of account on this.
We have to increase the demand.
Excellent.
That's number one. We have to increase our demand, whichever way. The
Excellent.
demand is the issue. The demand, we have to increase our demand.
Yeah. And
demand, which is base load demand, not our peak demand. You see, so that's something. The what type of demand? So we are sitting 7,000 megawatt for the last 6 years. So we need to increase it to 14,000, bringing in maybe captive generation, because captive, the people of industry who develop their captive power plants, because those are relatively inefficient. Now we have efficient plants in the system. So increasing demand will, the current situation that we're facing, will help a great deal.
Is to increase, the only way to survive current crisis is to increase the demand, produce more revenue, and then the average unit cost will reduce, and that will be more manageable to the end consumer. So my friends, 2 minutes, last comments, and then we wrap up because we are already crossed our designated time. Ahsan, first you please.
I completely agree with what Dr. Fiaz Saab is saying. I've been learning a lot from him, and he's been sending me good articles. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. So I agree with whatever he has said. My last word is that I think to provide energy security to this country, the words that Dr. Saab also used, provide energy security, we must rely on fuel indigenization. We must plan all our future capacity on indigenous fuels and then renewables. That's first thing. And the way to move forward is power sector reforms. And when I say power sector reforms, I mean competitive market structure, whether you create a short-term and a medium-term plan, you start from bilateral arrangements, and then you move on to the next steps. But we have to eventually move to competitive market structure. That's my 2 bits on it, and we have already discussed.
Yes, Dr.
Yeah, fully agree with Ahsan Saab. Right structuring, I call it. This reform. We use very fancy words, and still at the end of the day, we don't do much. So right structuring and right control, and rather decentralized control. So getting out of the ministerial controls, making the institutions independent, creating an independent system operator, which will do independent planning, independent compliance, and system operation merit order. So the overall cost will reduce, and encourage the industries and make certain policies, maybe zero rated, whatever, so that demand increases and we can sell more generation that we have. Thank you.
Great. And one conspicuous point is very happy point is that you both agree with each other, which is a very happy sort of a point of view, that a planner and one of the key player, they are agreeing to something same on the same point. My last comments, I think we discussed it. We discussed it in 3 last webinar. We have, I must say that we are now pretty much aware of the problem and the past of it. Now we have a problem that currently we need to address. In 1 or 2 steps that we have to address, having studied some of the models outside Pakistan and in Pakistan, keeping in view the governance system, political system, the interference, few things are very fancy that it should not be done. But the reality is they will stay. We cannot. There are certain problems that we have, which we can say are more of a cultural than the economic otherwise. So my recommendation, the first thing is, my endeavor would be to introduce, like Ahsan Saab also said, to introduce the merchant market, the competitive market. Bring in the market forces. Everybody should play on efficiencies. Everybody should be aware of the cost of generation, and the distribution should be system should be made accountable, that the units that we are giving to them, they are recovering. Because in the whole value chain, I'm not blaming any particular section or particular disco, but I have seen is the most of the bleeding is done, and the most indifferent relative term section of this value chain is the distribution system. And yes, we should have a proper planning independent system, so that it is not influenced by the private sector or the government sector they want to have. But then we have to have the surplus capacity to instill or instigate the growth in Pakistan. That is the only way. In my personal view, reduction of cost, although I'm a chartered accountant and that is the first thing that they love to do, the accountants. But reduction in cost is important, but what our first emphasis should be, how we can increase the electricity sale, introduce it, bring demand, electric vehicle that you mentioned. A defensive approach might not help us in long time. By this, I thank you very much, my dear colleagues, and I must say that I am more learned now because of your very good presentation, and I'm sure the participant on the virtual social media, they would have enjoyed, and there must be some other question they are still pending in their head. I'm sorry, because of the limited time we could only address. We could have stretched this program like another 2 hours, but of course, time is limited. So I thank you very much, Ahsan and Aftab, for participating and giving us your point of view. And I thank you very much, everyone who is watching this. And I am sorry that we could not take your questions, but we tried to address most of the critical issues. By this, thank you very much.
Aftab, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.